Hey, there's a man who sat in his truck on a decommissioned logging spur in Mingo County, West Virginia, watching a figure stand in the center of the road in his headlights. A figure he had already passed twice on the same stretch of gravel, from two different positions, at speeds no person could have run between them. The road has no parallel path. The woods on both sides are second-growth hardwood so dense you couldn't push through them in daylight without losing time. He drove home that night. He has not driven that road after dark since. He does not have a word for what he saw. To understand why he was on that road at all, you need to go back to that afternoon. His uncle's property sits off a ridge in Mingo County on land that has been in the family long enough that the access road doesn't show up on any current map. It's not a secret, it's just old. The county stopped maintaining it sometime in the 70s, and by the time the logging company that originally cut the spur closed down, the road had already begun its slow return to the ridge. His uncle knows every rut in it. So does he. He had driven it in snow, in mud, in the kind of mountain fog that turns headlights into a wall of white. That September evening, it was clear. Good moon. The temperature had dropped since noon, the way it does in the mountains when fall is close enough to feel but hasn't committed yet. He had spent the afternoon helping sort equipment in an outbuilding on the property, the kind of visit that doesn't have a fixed end time. You show up, you work until the work is done, you eat whatever's on the stove. His uncle had made a pot of coffee that morning, and the last of it had been sitting on the burner since 2 o'clock. He filled his thermos anyway, because the drive home was an hour, and he had things to think about. He folded his paper map into the door pocket out of habit. Cell service drops within the first half mile of the logging spur and doesn't come back until you reach the county route. He said goodbye at the door, walked to his truck in the gravel turnout, and headed out. The radio found a station for about 90 seconds before the ridge came up on the right side and killed it. He turned it off, rolled the window down a crack because the cab was warm from the drive out to the property. The thermos was on the seat beside him, the paper map in the door, and he was thinking about nothing in particular. Whether the tractor his uncle had been nursing along was worth the repair cost, something he needed to pick up at the hardware store the next morning. Normal things. The kind of thinking that fills the space on a familiar road. The first curve takes the moon behind the ridge. After that, his headlights were the only light source for the next 4 miles. He saw the figure on the right shoulder of the road about 40 feet ahead. Back to the road, face toward the tree line, not moving. He registered it the way you register anything on a rural road at night, quickly, as information to be processed and acted on. A person, standing still. He moved slightly left to give clearance and passed it. He noticed the feet were bare. He thought, neighbor. He thought, someone cutting across the property on foot, the way people do out here when they know the land well enough to treat it as a path. Bare feet on cold gravel were strange, but not impossible. Mountain people have their reasons and their habits, and he was not from away enough to assume he understood all of them. He didn't think about the figure again until the second curve. The road bends hard, left around a limestone outcropping roughly 4/10 of a mile past the first position. He knows the distance because he has driven it enough times to feel it in his body before the turn appears. Between those 2 points, the woods close in from both sides, dense second growth with undergrowth thick enough to slow a person to a crawl, even in full daylight, let alone in the dark, on cold ground, barefoot. The figure was on the right shoulder, same posture. Back to him, face toward the tree line. Perfectly still. He slowed. Not enough to stop, but close. He looked at it as long as he could in the time it took to pass. Same height, same build. He couldn't make out the clothing clearly, but the shape was the same, and the feet were the same. Pale against the gravel, bare in mid-September air that had dropped into the low 50s since the sun went down. He told himself it was a different person. He said it out loud, actually, in the cab. Two people on the same road, same approximate size. Both happened to be standing still when he passed. He heard how it sounded, and he kept driving. He made a specific decision not to look in the rearview mirror. He's clear about that when he describes it. He says it wasn't fear exactly, not yet, but something closer to a rule he invented in the moment. That looking back would be asking a question he wasn't ready to answer. So he kept his eyes forward and accelerated slightly, and the gravel ticked under his tires the way it always does on that spur, and the thermos slid a little on the seat when the road banked left, and he drove. The next section of road is a long right-hand bend that opens onto a straight stretch where you can see close to 200 feet of gravel ahead of you before the next turn. He came around that bend at a normal speed. The figure was standing in the center of the road, facing him. He stopped. It was a controlled stop, not a panic brake, not a skid, but the kind of stop your body executes before your mind has finished processing what it's seeing. The engine idled. His headlights put the figure in full wash at about 30 feet, the way a flashbulb washes the details out of a photograph. He could see the shape of it, the proportions, the fact that it was upright and motionless and facing him directly, but the brightness flattened the detail of the face. The feet were bare. The figure did not move when the light hit it, did not raise a hand, did not step back or turn away. He sat there. His window was still cracked from earlier. The engine was the only sound. No wind, no animals. The tree line on both sides was completely still. He estimates it was about 30 seconds. It might have been longer. Then the figure stepped sideways, not backward, not forward toward him. Sideways, off the right edge of the gravel, and into the dark between the trees. And it was gone. No sound of branches, no crunch of undergrowth. The road was empty and the woods were silent, and his headlights found nothing but gravel stretching ahead. He drove forward. He did not stop again. He did not look at the section of road where it stepped off. He reached the county route, then the state route, then home, and he sat in his driveway for a while before going inside. He brought it up to his uncle the following week without fully meaning to. His uncle listened and didn't say much. What he said was, "Don't drive that road after dark anymore." No question, no explanation. He moved on to something else and didn't come back to it. The part that settled in him afterward, the part that still hasn't left, is not the second sighting, as impossible as that was. It's the step, the single sideways movement off the road and into the trees, because a person who had been caught would run. A person who was frightened would retreat. What he watched do was neither of those things. It stepped off the road when it decided to step off the road in its own time, without urgency. Whatever it was doing on that spur, it finished when it was ready. He has since looked up the county records for that stretch of road. The section where the figure stepped off corresponds to a spur that was decommissioned in 1987 following a logging accident. It does not appear on any current map. His uncle confirmed no one lives along that stretch and no neighboring property lines run through it. He doesn't know where the spur leads. He has never been curious enough to find out. He drove that road one more time after that night. Just once, in daylight, about 3 weeks later, because he wanted to see the section where the figure had stepped off the road. He wanted to look at it with the sun up and the birds moving, and the ordinary noise of a mountain morning filling in around him. He wanted to make it small. He parked at the turnaround near his uncle's property and walked the spur on foot. The section where he had seen the figure the first 2 times, right shoulder, facing the tree line, showed him nothing. Gravel, weeds at the edge, trees starting 6 feet back. the undergrowth exactly as dense as he remembered. No path through it, no gap. He crouched and looked at the ground and found what he expected to find, which was nothing. He kept walking to the section where the figure had stood in the center of the road. He stood in the same spot. He looked up the road toward where his truck would have been. He tried to see it the way the figure had seen it. Headlights coming, gravel bright in the beams, the ridge rising on both sides. He stood there long enough to feel the weight of the position, and then he turned around and walked toward the section where it had stepped off. The spur entrance was still visible. Barely. 40 years of growth had narrowed it to about the width of a person's shoulders. The old track bed sunk below the surrounding ground level, the trees meeting overhead. He stood at the edge of it and looked in. The light dropped fast inside it, maybe 20 feet of visibility before the curve took the track away. He did not go in. He stood at the edge for about a minute, and then he walked back to his truck. He hasn't driven the logging spur after dark since that September. He goes out to his uncle's in the afternoon now and leaves before the light goes. His uncle has never brought up the conversation again, and he hasn't pushed it. That's not how things work out there. You say what needs to be said, and you let it sit. The part he kept coming back to in the weeks after was the sporting goods store in town where he had stopped for ammunition about 2 seasons prior. There was a man behind the counter, older, local, the kind of person who has worked the same counter long enough to know most of the hunters who come through by their first names. He had mentioned, in the course of an ordinary conversation about deer activity in that part of the county, that the logging spur road was worth hunting, but that you shouldn't be on it after dark. He'd said it simply, the way you state something that has already proven itself. Not a story attached to it. Just don't be on that road after dark. At the time, he had taken it as practical advice. Narrow road, no shoulder, bad sight lines at night, easy to meet another vehicle with nowhere to go. Made sense. He had nodded and bought his ammunition and moved on. He thought about that man's face a lot afterward, because the man had not been talking about traffic. He understood that now. He had not been warning about another truck on a 1-lane road. He had been saying something else in language that sounded like a practical caution because there was no other available language for it, or because the available language was not something you used with a man you knew only well enough to sell ammunition to. He went back to the store in November. The man was behind the counter. He bought a box of shells he didn't need, and he stood there for a moment, and he almost asked. He got close to it. He said something like, "I was out on the old logging spur a while back, the one off the ridge past my uncle's property." The man looked at him. "Yeah," he said, "just that." "I saw something on the road," he said. The man was quiet for a moment. He put the receipt on the counter and slid it across. "Don't drive it after dark," he said. The same words, the same tone. Not elaborating, not surprised. He took the receipt, he said thanks. He left. He doesn't know what the man knows, or how he knows it. He doesn't know what happened on that decommissioned spur in 1987, or whether the accident his uncle once mentioned in passing is connected to anything, or whether the road itself is the issue, or whether it's something that uses the road. He doesn't know if the figure he saw that September night has been seen by anyone else, or whether anyone else has driven that spur and parked at a curve and held very still and waited for something to step sideways off the gravel. What he knows is the step. He keeps coming back to the step, because everything else, the 2 impossible positions, the bare feet in September cold, the face he couldn't read in the headlights, all of that was frightening. But the step was something else. The step was the behavior of something that understood it had been seen and had decided, on its own schedule, that it was finished being seen. He still goes out to his uncle's property. He still uses that road. He goes in the afternoon and he leaves before dark, and the extra hour he loses to that habit is an hour he does not think twice about losing. There are roads you drive in daylight and roads you don't drive at all, and the only difference is what you know about them. Now he knows. The decommissioned spur is still there. The entrance is still visible from the main road if you know where to look. He doesn't stop there anymore. He drives past it without slowing down, and he keeps his eyes forward, and the thermos on the seat beside him has gone cold by the time he reaches his uncle's, and he drinks it anyway because cold coffee is a small thing, and some costs are worth paying to arrive before the light changes. He never found out what is at the end of that spur. He said once that he thought about it for a long time and eventually made a decision that served him well since. Some questions are not answered by asking them. Some questions are answered by the fact that you still want to be around to ask them. The man behind the sporting goods counter retired the following spring. He moved away to live near his daughter in another state. He left before there was any chance of a real conversation. Whether he would have had one, there's no way to know. The spur is still there. The record still shows the decommissioning. The accident that preceded it is still in the county files, though the details have never been something anyone in his family discusses in specific terms. He drives past it twice a week on average, going out to help his uncle and coming back. He does not look at the entrance when he passes. He doesn't need to. He already knows exactly where it is. The next account came from a couple, Marcus and Dana, who submitted it together roughly 6 months after it happened. They asked that their last name not be used. What they wanted, they said, was for the account to be told accurately, because the inaccurate version, the one where they panicked over an animal and let their imagination do the rest, was already the story they had told most people, and they were tired of it. The accurate version is what follows. Both of them had been camping since childhood. That's worth establishing because it changes what the account means. Marcus had done solo backpacking trips in the Smokies and the Allegheny Highlands going back to when he was 12 years old. Dana had grown up spending summers at a family camp in the mountains of western North Carolina, the kind of place where the adults send the kids out in the morning and expect them back at dusk, and nobody tracks the hours in between. They knew how the woods behave at night. They knew how sound carries across water, and how wind in a canopy can imitate voices, and how an animal moving through dry leaves can produce, briefly, something that sounds exactly like footsteps. They were not people who frightened easily in the backcountry. They said that. They said it first before anything else because they understood that it mattered. They had driven up to Cherokee National Forest in eastern Tennessee in early October, a trip they'd been planning for a month. The target was a designated backcountry site on a ridge trail, a site Marcus had used twice before. Nothing fancy. Established fire ring, good drainage, far enough from the trailhead that you didn't get weekend noise. The drive from their apartment took about 4 hours. They stopped once for gas and bad coffee at a station outside Etowah, the kind of place where the coffee has been on the burner since the morning rush, and it's now 2 in the afternoon. Dana drank hers anyway. Marcus left half of his in the cup. They reached the trailhead parking area just before noon. Signed the register. Both names, date in, planned, date out, intended site. Hung their food according to the posted guidelines without discussing it because it was habit. The hike in gained about 800 feet over 3 miles, switchbacks through hardwood, and then a narrower section of ridge trail that opened onto the site at the top. Flat ground, established ring. A view to the south that would have been better before the leaves dropped, but was still worth the climb. Setup took maybe 40 minutes. Tent on the level patch east of the fire ring. Sleeping pads and bags unrolled. Cook kit organized. Dana gathered deadfall while Marcus filtered water from the creek that ran along the base of the ridge below the site. The whole process was comfortable and practiced, the kind of camp routine that becomes wordless after enough trips. They ate early, kept the fire low, talked for a while about things that had nothing to do with the woods, and were in the tent before 10. The first night was fine. That needs to be said plainly. Nothing happened the first night. They slept well and woke to fog on the ridge that burned off before 9, hiked an additional loop trail for 4 miles in the morning, ate lunch at the site, rested through the warmest part of the afternoon. By the time the light started to change, they had covered enough ground to be tired in a satisfying way. They made dinner, watched the fire die down to coals, and stayed up talking later than they'd planned. Normal, easy, the kind of trip that reminds you why you go. They had passed a trail volunteer on the way back from the loop hike that afternoon. Older man, vest with a Forest Service patch sewn on, working on a drainage bar that had started to fail where the trail crossed a wet section. He looked up when they came through, asked if they were at the ridge site, and when Marcus said yes, told them the site had been flagged for animal activity and to make sure their food was properly stored. Marcus told him it was hung and stored correctly. The man nodded and went back to his work on the drainage bar. They assumed he meant bears. The food was already handled. Dana mentioned it to Marcus that evening while they were cooking, and they agreed they had done everything correctly and didn't discuss it again. The second night, the temperature dropped harder than the forecast had suggested, a cold front pushing down from the north and dropping the ridge into the upper 30s by midnight. Dana woke sometime around 1 in the morning because the cold had worked through her bag and she needed to add a layer. She lay still for a moment doing the calculation of whether getting up was worth it. That was when she heard the sound from outside. A single shifting sound, gravel or loose stone, from somewhere to the left of the tent, close enough to be inside the camp perimeter but far enough that she couldn't place it exactly. She held still and listened. Nothing followed it. She decided it was an animal working the edge of camp, checking the fire ring, and she added the layer without fully sitting up and went back to sleep. Marcus came awake 40 minutes later. He hadn't heard the gravel sound. He said he surfaced from sleep for no reason he could identify, the way you sometimes do in a new place when something shifts in the quality of the silence without making a nameable sound. He lay on his back, looking at the tent ceiling, which was faintly illuminated by what remained of the cloud-diffused moonlight. Then the sound came from outside the left wall of the tent. Something moving through dry leaves in a slow arc, not crashing, not running, not the random foraging pattern of an animal working for food, but a measured movement that started somewhere to the north of the tent and tracked in a long curve around the fire ring and came to a stop somewhere to the south. A circuit, the kind of movement that has a start and an end. He reached over and put his hand on Dana's arm. She was already awake. She had been awake since the sound started. Neither of them spoke. The fire had been out for hours and the night had closed in around the tent, the fabric walls giving them nothing but the faint blue-gray of whatever light made it through the cloud cover, just enough to see the shape of each other and the interior geometry of the tent and nothing else. They lay still. The circuit had ended. The woods around the site had gone back to the kind of silence that follows a sound rather than the kind that precedes one, and Marcus said later that he was aware of the difference, that the silence felt occupied in a way it hadn't before the sound started. 1 minute. 2. The coals in the fire ring had long since gone cold. Whatever had completed that arc around their tent did not continue moving. It did not retreat. It stopped somewhere on the south side of the camp and it was still there, or at least nothing indicated that it had left, and Marcus had his hand on Dana's arm, and neither of them had any particular plan except to remain exactly where they were and wait to see what happened next. That was the state of things when the chapter of the night that neither of them can fully explain without their voices changing began. They were lying still in the dark, the circuit completed, the silence wrong in a way they could feel but not name, waiting for whatever was going to happen next to happen. The zipper started moving at 2:09 in the morning. Marcus checked his watch. Old habit, the kind you develop when you spend enough nights in the backcountry and time starts to feel unreliable in the dark. He checked it because something in him understood that the time was going to matter later, that this was the kind of moment people ask about afterward. 2:09. He remembered it the way you remember the specific detail that anchors everything else. The zipper started at the bottom of the door panel and moved upward. That direction matters. When you open a tent from the inside, you pull the zipper up and around the curve of the door frame. When you close it from the inside, you pull it back down. The motion Marcus and Dana were hearing, upward from the bottom, along the left side of the door, was the motion of someone opening the tent from the outside. Someone who knew which direction to pull, one tooth at a time. That's how Dana described it. Not the quick, confident pull of a person who has opened their own tent 1,000 times. Deliberate, measured, the way you move when you are trying not to be heard, or when you want the person on the other side to hear every individual tooth of the zipper separating and understand exactly what is happening to them. Marcus stopped breathing. He said it was not a decision. His body made it before he did. Dana's hand found his arm in the dark, and her grip was different from how it had been before. Different in a way that told him she was not listening anymore. She was past listening. She was already somewhere the sound had taken her. The door fabric began to separate. The gap opened along the left side, an inch, 2 inches, the cool outside air moving through it. The specific cold of a Tennessee ridge at 2 in the morning in October pressing into the tent interior. Through the gap, in the narrow slice of outside that became visible, Marcus could see the dark shapes of the trees at the far edge of the site, and the gray dead circle of the fire ring, and above it the slightly lighter dark of a clouded sky. Nothing else. No silhouette in the gap. No shape blocking the tree line. The zipper stopped at approximately the midpoint of the door's left side. Half open. Not enough to see clearly through. Not enough for a person to reach an arm through without effort. Not enough to enter. Just stopped. The silence that followed was different from the silence before the zipper started. Before, the silence had felt occupied. After, it felt held. Like something on the other side of that half-open door was as still as they were, and as aware, and waiting to see what they would do with the same information they were waiting to get from it. Marcus said 40 minutes passed. He tracked it on his watch, checking it every few minutes in the way you check a clock when you need time to be moving faster than it is. Dana did not move. He did not move. His hand eventually found the interior zipper pull, slowly, the way you move when you are certain you are being listened to, and he closed his fingers over it without pulling it. Just held it. An anchor. A way of saying, this far and no further, even if no one on the other side of the door could know what his hand was doing. Nothing pressed against the fabric. Nothing completed what the zipper had started. Whatever had been on the other side of that door either left without making a sound or was still there in the dark, waiting in a patience that outlasted Marcus's ability to track it. First, light came slowly, the tent fabric going from black to gray to a dim and colorless version of itself. When Marcus could see actual shapes outside through the mesh, the fire ring, the dark line of the tree edge, the pale trunks of the birches on the north side of the site, he decided it was enough. He reached up and zipped the door the rest of the way closed first. Then he opened it fully and stepped out alone, telling Dana to stay inside without explaining why, because there was no explanation that would have helped. He almost missed it. He was looking at the tree line and the fire ring and the food bags still hanging where they had hung them, all of it exactly as they had left it. Nothing moved or disturbed, and he almost went back to the tent and told Dana it was fine. Then he looked down. One boot print. In the mud directly in front of the tent door, facing the tent. Not a trail of them. Not a set approaching and a set retreating. One print, pressed into the soft ground that the overnight cold had left damp and receptive, directly in front of the door, facing inward. The size was wrong for Marcus and wrong for Dana. Larger than either of them. And the depth of it, Dana came out and crouched beside it without being asked and pointed this out before Marcus had found the words for it. The depth was wrong for a person passing through. You get that depth when someone stands in one place for a long time, when the weight is stationary rather than moving. Dana photographed it before they struck camp. She took 4 photographs from different angles, the last one with Marcus's boot beside it for scale. They packed out without discussing whether to pack out. The decision made itself. The trail volunteer was at the lower section of the trail when they came through, working a different drainage problem about a mile from the trailhead. Marcus stopped and took out Dana's phone and held the photograph out to the man without saying anything. Just let him look at it. The volunteer looked at it for what felt like a long time. His expression didn't change in any way Marcus could read. Not surprise, not concern. Nothing that suggested the image was new information. He handed the phone back and said the site would need to be reported. He said it the way you say something procedural, the way you say something you have said before. Marcus asked him what kind of animal activity the site had been flagged for. The volunteer was already turning toward the ranger station at the far end of the parking area. He didn't answer. He didn't slow down. Marcus called after him once. The man kept walking. They sat in the truck for a while before driving out. Neither of them said much. The heat was on, and the windows were fogging at the edges, and Dana still had the photograph open on her phone, looking at it. The single print facing the tent door. The depth of something standing still for a long time. They sent a follow-up email to the Forest Service office 3 weeks after the trip. The auto-reply confirmed receipt. No one responded. The site was closed within the week, no public announcement, no reason given on the trail status page. Whether it has since reopened, they don't know. Whether the volunteer filed a report, they don't know. What made the print and why the zipper stopped at half open rather than completing what it started, they have never been able to answer. Dana still checks the zipper from the inside before she sleeps anywhere. Tent, cabin, motel room. She unzips it partway and runs the pull-up from the bottom and makes sure the motion is her own. She has not been able to explain this habit to anyone who wasn't there, and she has stopped trying. The detail that stays with Marcus is not the zipper. It's the boot print's depth. Because a person passing by makes a certain impression in soft ground. A person standing makes a deeper one. And a person standing in one place, in front of a tent door, in the dark, for a very long time, makes the kind of impression you don't mistake for anything else once you've seen it. This next one comes from a retired park ranger who worked the Pisgah district in North Carolina for 22 years. He asked that we not use his name or the specific trail designation, because even in retirement he feels some obligation to the district, or maybe to the people who still work it, or maybe just to the idea that some official accounts should stay official. What he told us is not the official account. The official account has the timestamps wrong. He said he had only told the story once before, to another ranger who retired the year after the incident and never brought it up again between them. He told it to us because he was getting older, and the specific details were the kind he didn't want to lose to time, and the specific details had not blurred. He remembered all of them with the particular clarity that attaches to the moments that reorganize you, the moments that change the way you read everything that came before them. He had been with the district long enough that a solo storm damage patrol on a closed trail was routine. This was mid-October, a few years back now. A rain system had come through the previous week. 3 days of sustained mountain rain, the kind that undermines trail tread and takes out drainage bars and pushes the creeks high enough to make the lower sections of certain trails genuinely dangerous to walk. His assignment was straightforward: walk the ridge trail above the flood line, document damage, flag anything requiring maintenance crew attention, confirm that the closure signs at the lower access points were still standing and legible. He signed out from the district office at 7:15 in the morning and noted it in the log. The access road to the lower trailhead had taken damage. A section of gravel washed into the drainage ditch. The road surface soft enough that he wasn't confident taking the truck all the way in. He parked at the upper gate and walked down. Added time to the patrol, maybe 40 minutes each way, but the morning was cold and clear and he didn't mind it. 22 years in the Pisgah will do that to you. You stop minding the extra miles. He worked for roughly 2 hours without incident. 3 sections of eroded tread flagged. 1 drainage bar undercut badly enough to need a full reset by the maintenance crew. 2 closure signs at the lower access knocked sideways by debris and needing repositioning. The trail below the flood line was in the condition he had expected. Silted, soft in places. 1 short section where the tread had washed out entirely, and the creek had temporarily claimed the path. Standard flood damage. He ate half a sandwich on a dry rock above the high water mark and drank from a thermos that had gone lukewarm somewhere around mile 2. Signed his initials on a damage log that nobody would read until the following week. His radio was with him. Reception below the ridge on that trail was always variable. The terrain blocked the signal in 2 places, and in the hollow below the floodline you were working with intermittent contact at best. He checked in at standard intervals when he had signal. The district office acknowledged each one and had nothing to pass along. Quiet day in the district. Just him and the damage report, and the sound of the creek running higher than normal through the lower hollow. At approximately 11:40, he was working his way along the upper edge of the flooded section, about 30 feet above the high water line, when his radio produced a clean signal. Not static, not a partial transmission. A clear, unbroken signal. The kind of reception you get on a good day on the ridge, not on the floor of a hollow with a ridge blocking 3/4 of the sky. He stopped walking and he listened. 3 short pulses. A pause. 1 long pulse. He knew the pattern immediately. 3 short, 1 long is the standard lost hiker distress sequence. The signal taught in every trail safety course and printed on the information cards at every trailhead in the district. He had responded to that signal twice in his career, both times for real, both times for hikers who needed help and got it. He knew what it meant, and he knew what it required. It was coming from below him, from the lower section of the trail, from the section that had been underwater 4 days ago and was still, by any practical measure, inaccessible. He stood still and ran through the checklist the way 22 years of training make automatic. Trail was closed, had been closed for 6 days, closure signs posted at both access points. No permit requests for that section had been flagged. No one, according to any record he had access to, was supposed to be on that trail below the flood line. He logged the signal, noted the time, and radioed it in. Dispatch acknowledged and said they would check the permit database. He waited, 5 minutes passed. 10. He called dispatch again. They said the database showed no active permits for that section, and they would flag it for follow-up. Follow-up. He said the word still bothered him, even now. Follow-up was paperwork. Follow-up was later. He was already there. He made the decision a careful person makes in that situation. He would descend to the upper edge of the washed-out section, close enough to call out, and listen for a response. If someone had gone in before the closure signs were posted, or had ignored them, or had been caught below when the flooding started, any of those things were possible. Unlikely, but possible, he would be able to hear them answer. If there was no answer, he would document the signal, note the absence of any hiker, and let it go through channels. He picked his way down the slope carefully. The ground was still wet and the leaf litter was hiding soft spots. He took his time. He reached the upper edge of the washed-out section and he stopped. The mud below him was undisturbed. He used that word specifically when he described it. Undisturbed. Not difficult to read, not tracked over and confusing. Undisturbed. The silt the flood had deposited across the trail surface was smooth and unbroken in every direction he could see. No boot prints, no animal tracks, no marks of any kind. Whatever the flood had deposited and then receded from had left a surface that a person could not have crossed without leaving a clear record in it. He called out anyway. Full voice, the carrying shout that moves through forest the way sound is supposed to when you need it to reach someone. He waited. 12 minutes later, the signal came again, 3 short, 1 long. From deeper in the closed section, further down the trail, further into the hollow, past the washed-out stretch. From somewhere that required crossing the undisturbed mud to reach. The signal was as clean as the first one. No distortion, no fading in and out the way a signal does when the equipment or the conditions are poor. Clear and metered and deliberate. The same pattern, the same intervals. He stood at the edge of the undisturbed silt and he thought about something an older ranger had told him during his first season in the district. It had come at the end of a long shift, said the way you say things that you've earned rather than learned. The older man had told him, if you hear a distress signal from a closed trail, log it and leave. Don't investigate alone. He had said it plainly, practically, and then moved on to something else, and the ranger had filed it away as a common sense about the danger of going into compromised terrain without backup. Standing at the edge of that smooth, unbroken silt with a second signal coming from somewhere past it, he understood for the first time that the older man had not been talking about terrain. He did not cross the mud. He documented the signal, its direction, the condition of the trail surface. He photographed the silt. He began climbing back up the slope toward the ridge trail above, moving carefully, not rushing, the way you move when you have made a decision and you are committed to it, and you do not want to examine it too closely while you are still in the middle of executing it. He was near the base of the ridge, in the section of trail just above the flood line, when he found the register card tucked under a flat rock at the path's edge. A standard trailhead slip, name, date, intended route, filled out in clear handwriting. The route listed was the closed lower trail. The date was 6 days prior. The last day, anyone could have legally entered that section before the closure was posted. The card was dry, completely, inexplicably dry. The rock over it was wet. The ground around it for 10 feet in every direction was saturated. The card was dry and the ink was clear, and the handwriting was unhurried. He bagged it and kept climbing. He reached the ridge trail and kept moving. He didn't stop at the junction to look back down into the hollow. He made a note to himself that he would document the card when he reached the office, that he would file the complete account with both signal times and the condition of the mud and the impossible dryness of the register slip, and that he would let the district handle what came next. 22 years had taught him that the correct response to something you don't understand is documentation. You write down what you saw. You let the record speak. He was about 100 yards up the ridge trail, moving at a steady pace, when the third signal came. 3 short, 1 long. From above him, from the ridge trail, from the section he had walked down from. From the trail he was currently walking up toward, the section he had covered on his descent 2 hours earlier, the section where his own boot prints were the only marks in the damp trail tread. The signal was as clean as the first 2. Same pattern, same intervals, same quality of transmission that had no business being that clear in that terrain. He did not stop. He noted it the way you note the details that will go in the report, and he kept walking. He reached the upper gate. He reached his truck. He sat in the cab for a moment with the engine running before he drove out. Not doing anything in particular, just sitting with the heater on and his hands on the wheel and the radio making its ordinary district frequency sounds around him. He filed the full incident report that afternoon. Both signal occurrences, their times, the state of the trail surface, the register card, all of it written out in the standard format with the standard level of detail. He submitted the card as physical evidence and logged the submission. He noted in the report that he had heard a third signal on his ascent of the ridge trail from a position that would have required the signal source to pass him on the trail without his knowledge, which was not possible given the trail's exposure and the absence of any alternate route. The section of his report dealing with the third signal was marked insufficient detail for follow-up by the reviewing supervisor. He requested clarification. He received a form response indicating that the incident had been reviewed and that no further action was required at this time. The register card was logged in the evidence index. In the next quarterly audit of the evidence index, it was listed as misplaced. No follow-up inquiry was opened. The misplaced designation was never updated. He worked 4 more years in the district after that patrol. He submitted 2 follow-up inquiries about the incident in the first year, both of which received form responses. After the second one, he stopped asking. He did his job. He patrolled his assigned trails. He documented damage and cleared deadfall and talked to hikers about bear canisters and fire safety and leave no trace principles, and he was good at all of it, and he finished out his 22 years the way he had started them, which was carefully and thoroughly, and without making more of things than the evidence supported. He retired on a Thursday in March. On his last day, he requested a copy of his complete incident logs for the years he had worked the district, which was a standard request and was granted without comment. He took the files home. He read through them over the following week, not looking for anything in particular, just reviewing the record of what he had done with his time. The log entry for the storm damage patrol was there. Date, trail designation, sign-out time, check-in intervals, damage documentation, all of it present and accounted for. The 2 signal occurrences were logged with their times. He had recorded the first signal at 11:40 and the second signal 12 minutes later, at 11:52. In the log, both signals were time-stamped at 11:40, the same minute. Both of them. The first signal and the second signal, which he remembered with complete clarity as being separated by 12 minutes of descent, of standing at the flood line, of calling out and waiting and hearing nothing, and then hearing the second signal from deeper in the hollow. Both of them were logged at 11:40. He sat with that for a long time. He was certain of the 12-minute gap. He had logged the first signal immediately, and he had noted the second signal on his radio log at 11:52 in the field, before he descended, before he found the register card, before anything else happened. He had written 11:52 in his field notes. The office log said 11:40. Either the time had been entered incorrectly when the field notes were transcribed to the official log, which was possible, and was the explanation that required the fewest additional assumptions, or someone had changed it. He did not know which. He had no way of knowing. What he knew was that the official record of an event he had witnessed with full professional attention contained timestamps that made it impossible to document the 12-minute gap between the signals. A gap that was, in his assessment, one of the most significant details of the entire incident, because it meant the signal had come twice from the same impossible location with time in between, rather than once and then again immediately, which would have been easier to attribute to equipment malfunction or atmospheric interference. The older ranger who had given him the advice about closed trail signals died the spring after the incident. He had been sick for a while. The ranger had gone to the service and spoken to the family and thought about asking the widow whether her husband had ever talked about what he meant by that particular piece of advice, and then decided it was not a question you asked at a funeral, and then never found another occasion to ask it. And now the occasion was permanently gone. The name on the register card was a name he did not recognize and could not find in any missing persons database he had access to. He had checked 3 times in the first year. The person named on that card was never reported missing from that trail. No family inquiry was ever filed. The route they had listed was the closed lower trail on a day when the trail was still legally open, which meant that whatever happened to them, if anything had happened to them, if they had been a real person and not something else entirely, had happened after they signed in and before the closure went up. Whether the card was real or not, he genuinely cannot say. He handled it, bagged it, submitted it. It was dry when it should have been soaked. The handwriting was clear. The date was accurate. Those are facts. What they mean, he has spent years declining to speculate about in any official capacity, and in his unofficial capacity he has concluded only that he does not have the right framework for them. The detail that stays with him, the one he comes back to in the specific way you come back to things that have not resolved, is the mud. Not the signals, not the timestamps, the mud. Because the mud is a simple physical fact. Whatever produced those signals in that hollow was on the far side of an unbroken silt surface that nothing had crossed. He photographed it. He documented it. The photographs are in the files he keeps at home, in the copy of the incident log the district gave him without comment on his last Thursday. He still walks. He does trail work as a volunteer now, a few weekends a month, a different district, different terrain. He does not work the Pisgah anymore. He did not request a transfer. He simply retired and did not go back. And the new district is good work, and the trails are in decent shape, and the radio reception is reliable on most of the ridgelines. He said the thing that bothers him about the mud, the final thing, the thing underneath all the other things, is not that the signals came from somewhere nothing had crossed to reach. It's that something produced those signals, in that hollow, on that closed trail, with a patience and a precision that implied purpose. 3 short, 1 long. The correct pattern, the one that means someone needs help. Whatever was down there knew the pattern, and it used it. This one comes from a woman who asked us to call her Carol. She was driving alone through eastern Kentucky on a route she had taken before. Not a route she knew intimately, but one she had driven twice in the past 3 years. Enough to know the general shape of it, the way the hills close in and the towns arrive without much warning, and the cell service comes and goes depending on which side of the ridge the road is running on. She was coming back from a family visit. Not an emergency, not a celebration, the ordinary kind of family visit that leaves you tired in a specific way that has nothing to do with the distance. She had planned to drive all the way home that night. By 9 o'clock, she had revised that plan. The motel was the first vacancy sign she saw that was actually lit. Single story, 8 or 10 units arranged in an L around a gravel lot. One overhead light on a pole that cast everything in a yellow that made the lot look smaller than it was. A covered metal walkway ran the length of the building with a railing that had gone rusty at the joints. The office was a converted end unit with a handwritten rate card taped inside the window glass and a lamp on the desk that was on. Carol said she has stayed in places like it before and has never had a problem. She is practical about travel. She needed a bed and 6 hours and to not be on the road anymore. That was all she was looking for. The woman at the front desk was older, reading glasses pushed up on her head. A paper registration ledger open on the counter. No computer, no card terminal that looked like it had been manufactured in the last decade, though it processed Carol's card without trouble and produced a receipt that was still warm from the machine. The woman wrote Carol's information in the ledger in careful handwriting, tore off the receipt and slid a key across the counter on a worn plastic fob with the room number written on it in permanent marker. Room 6, second from the far end. Carol took the key and turned toward the door. The woman said it without looking up from whatever she had started writing in the ledger. She said it the way you'd tell someone the shower takes a minute to get warm. Practical, slightly tired, the tone of someone who has said the same thing enough times that the words have gone smooth with use. Don't open the door if it knocks 3 times. Doesn't matter what it sounds like after. Don't open it. Carol stopped. She turned back. The woman was writing something in the ledger, her pen moving steadily, not looking up. Carol said, "I'm sorry?" And the woman repeated it in the same tone and the same words, and then the moment shifted, the way moments do when the other person has clearly finished speaking and is waiting for you to leave, and Carol stood there for another second and decided she was too tired to ask a follow-up question that might not have a satisfying answer, and she went to her room. Room 6 had a queen bed with a floral coverlet, so faded the pattern had gone impressionistic. A television bolted to the dresser at a height that required you to look slightly up at it. A heating unit under the window that ticked when it cycled on. And a bathroom with a light that brightened slowly, taking 4 or 5 seconds to reach full power after the switch. Standard, perfectly adequate. There was a closet near the entrance, short hanging rod, hollow core door, and when Carol hung her jacket, she noticed the door didn't sit flush in the frame. A gap of about an inch on the latch side, the wood having swollen or shifted at some point and never been corrected. She pushed it as far as it would go and left it. She went through her normal end-of-day routine, brushed her teeth, set her phone to charge on the nightstand, checked the chain lock on the door and the deadbolt below it, both of which functioned correctly, turned off the overhead light and got into bed, and lay in the thin line of parking lot light that came through the gap in the curtains and fell across the ceiling in a steady pale bar. She was asleep in 10 minutes. She knows this because she remembers nothing between lying down and waking up, and the clock on her phone said 2:30 when she opened her eyes. 3 knocks on the hallway door. She registered them in the half-second between sleep and waking, which meant she heard them clearly rather than constructing them from the edges of a dream. They were real knocks, spaced evenly, not hurried, not loud, the knock of someone who expects the door to be answered rather than the knock of someone trying to be heard through noise. She lay still for a moment and listened. Nothing followed. No voice, no second set of knocks, no sound of footsteps on the metal walkway outside. She got up and went to the door and looked through the peephole. The covered walkway was empty. The railing. The gravel lot beyond it under the yellow overhead light. A pickup truck she hadn't noticed when she arrived, parked at the far end of the lot. Nothing else. She stood at the peephole for close to a minute, watching. Nothing moved. No one was standing to the side of the door where the peephole's angle couldn't reach. She could see the walkway in both directions and both were empty. She went back to bed. She did not remove the chain from the door. She lay in the dark and listened to the heating unit tick and told herself it was a wrong room, a drunk person, a confused traveler, all the ordinary explanations that exist for knocking on motel doors in the middle of the night. She was not asleep, but she was not far from it. The bar of parking lot light lay across the ceiling. The heating unit ticked. Then the closet knocked. Same pattern. 3 knocks, the same even spacing, the same unhurried tempo. From inside the closet or from the wall behind it. She couldn't determine exactly because she was across the room, and the sound had the slightly muffled quality of something coming through a layer of material. But the pattern was identical. The same 3 beats, the same intervals between them. She did not move for a long time. The warning came back to her with the specific force of something dismissed and then proven. Don't open the door if it knocks 3 times. She had assumed the woman meant the hallway door. She understood now that the woman had not specified a door. She had said the door, and the closet door was a door, and she had not opened it, not because she had followed the warning, but because nothing in her body was willing to cross the room and put her hand on that handle. The warning and the instinct had arrived at the same conclusion by different routes. She turned on the bedside lamp. She did not approach the closet. She sat on the edge of the bed with her back against the headboard, and she watched the closet door and she waited to see if the pattern would repeat. It did not repeat. The heating unit ticked. The lamp held its light steady. The 1-inch gap in the closet door showed her nothing but darkness on the other side of it, which was exactly as much as she wanted to see and exactly as much as she was willing to accept. Around 3 in the morning, the television in the unit next to hers came on through the wall, low enough that she couldn't make out words, just the murmur of voices and occasional music, the generic sound of a television in a room where someone is using it for company rather than content. She had not heard anyone in that unit when she arrived. The lot had been nearly empty, but the sound was ordinary and she let it be ordinary. The closet did not knock again. The hallway door did not knock again. She sat with the lamp on and watched the gap in the closet door and listened to the muffled television next door and waited for something she couldn't name. At 4:40, the television in the next unit went quiet, and then, 10 minutes later, the exterior door of that unit opened and closed. Quietly, carefully, the controlled sound of someone leaving a room without wanting to be heard doing it. She listened for footsteps on the metal walkway, the kind of sound that would have meant someone walking away from that door, past her door, toward the parking lot. She listened for a long time. There were no footsteps. She stayed on the bed until 5:50. The lamp stayed on. The closet door stayed closed, and the gap in it showed her nothing. And the walkway outside stayed silent after the neighboring unit's door had opened and closed without footsteps following. She did not sleep again. She sat with her back against the headboard and her phone on her knee, and she waited for the parking lot light through the curtain gap to be joined by something warmer, something that meant morning rather than just the absence of afternoon. And when that finally happened, she got up and packed her bag and checked the room once more and went to the office. The same woman was at the front desk. Whether she had slept somewhere in the building or whether she had been in the office the whole night was not something Carol could determine, and she decided it was not a question she wanted to ask. The woman took Carol's key without particular acknowledgement. Carol set it on the counter and the woman picked it up, and that was the transaction. The ledger was open on the counter. Carol had not planned to look at it. She was standing 2 feet from it while the woman processed the checkout, and the ledger was open and the light in the office was adequate, and the entries on the visible page were written in the same careful handwriting as the one the woman had been making when Carol left the night before. She was not trying to read it, but the ledger was there, and she was there, and the entry that caught her attention was simple enough to register without effort. Room 6 appeared 3 times on the visible page. 3 separate entries, spread across what looked like several years judging by the dates, each one in slightly different ink, and with the slight variation in pen pressure that accumulates when the same person writes the same thing over a long span of time. Each entry had a notation in the right margin. The same notation, 3 times, the same abbreviation in the same handwriting. 3K, no open. Carol took out her phone and photographed the page. She made the decision and executed it in the same motion, before she had fully processed why, the way you do when something in you understands that the window for a thing is short. The camera sound was not loud, but it was audible in the quiet office. The woman looked up. Carol looked back at her. Neither of them said anything. The woman's expression was not angry and not surprised, and not particularly anything. It was the expression of someone who has arrived at a point in a situation they have been at before, and who knows how it ends. She held Carol's gaze for a moment, and then she looked back down at whatever she was writing. Carol took her bag and her receipt and walked to her car. She drove out of the lot and onto the state route and put the radio on and drove for 30 miles before she pulled over at a gas station with functioning lights and a truck refueling at the pump, and enough ambient human presence to make stopping feel like a reasonable thing to do. She sat in the car and opened the photograph on her phone. The entries were clear. Room 6, 3 times, 3 different dates across what looked like 6 or 7 years, and in the right margin each time. 3K, no open. She looked at the abbreviation for a while. 3 knocks, no open. The record of a rule, written into a ledger over years, applied to one specific room by a woman who had been maintaining it long enough that the handwriting had shifted slightly between the first entry and the most recent one. A record of compliance. A record of what had been done correctly by multiple guests in room 6 on 3 separate occasions that she knew of. She thought about the neighboring unit's door opening at 5 in the morning without footsteps following. She thought about the closet's 1-inch gap and what the darkness behind it had looked like for the 4 hours she had watched it. She thought about the woman's tone when she gave the warning. Not ominous, not dramatic, just tired. The way you are tired of saying something that needs to be said every time, regardless of whether anyone is going to listen. She sent an inquiry to the county clerk's office asking about the motel's operating history and complaint record. The clerk's office replied within a few days that there was no formal complaint record on file for the property, which was not the same as saying nothing had ever happened there. And Carol understood the difference. A local historian had been copied on the email as a matter of standard routing, and he replied separately about a week later. He said the building had operated as a boarding house from sometime in the 1930s until 1962, when the current ownership had converted it to a motel. He said that in the winter of 1962, 2 guests had been found dead in one of the units. Cause of death was listed as undetermined in the county coroner's report, which the historian had reviewed as part of a broader research project on the area. He noted that undetermined was an unusual designation for that era, when coroners were more likely to make a finding even on limited evidence than to leave the record open. He did not specify which unit the deaths had occurred in. Carol read his email 3 times and did not write back to ask. She thought about it for a long time. She thought about the pattern of 3 knocks on the hallway door and then 3 knocks from the closet, identical in timing and spacing, as if whatever produced the first set had moved between those 2 positions in the interval between them without using the walkway she had watched through the peephole for nearly a minute without seeing anyone on it. She thought about the neighboring unit's door. She thought about the years of ledger entries and the worn quality of the warning that told her the woman had said those words to many people in room 6 over many years, and that 3K no open was her shorthand for a night that had gone correctly, which implied a category of nights in that room that had not. What Carol still cannot account for is the footsteps. Not their absence on the walkway after the neighboring unit's door opened at 5 in the morning. She has a theory about that, or several theories, none of them comfortable. What she cannot account for is that before the door opened, after the television went quiet, she had listened to the total silence of a motel at 4:50 in the morning for 10 full minutes. And in those 10 minutes there were no footsteps in the neighboring unit either. No one moving around. No preparation for leaving. Just silence, and then a door opening, and then silence again, and no one walking away. Whatever had been in that room was not moving around before it left. It was already at the door. She has not stopped in that county since. She has not stopped at a motel in eastern Kentucky since, which she acknowledges is a larger behavioral change than the specific facts of one night necessarily warrant. But the warning was county-specific, and she has found that her body agrees with that boundary, even when her reasoning mind is less certain about it. Don't open the door if it knocks 3 times. She didn't. She still doesn't know what that protected her from, and she has decided that not knowing is something she can live with considerably more easily than she could have lived with finding out. The unit number of the 2 deaths in 1962 remains unspecified in her correspondence with the historian. She has his email address. She has not followed up. This next account is a family story, the kind that gets passed around quietly, usually only between people who already know the land and already know the family and already understand that some things get said plainly because there is no other way to say them. A woman in her 60s submitted it on behalf of her daughter, who was in her late 20s when it happened. The mother's note was 3 sentences. She said, "We knew. We all knew the rule, and we knew why it existed, even if we never said why out loud. She just didn't take it seriously because she had never had a reason to, and that is the only reason she is here to tell it." The daughter's name has been changed. We'll call her Reese. She grew up on family land in Letcher County, Kentucky, in the eastern part of the state where the ridges run steep and the hollows between them are deep enough to make their own weather. The family had owned the property for 4 generations, long enough that the original deed had become more of a concept than a document, long enough that the land had shaped the family as much as the family had shaped the land. An old house at the bottom of a hollow, a creek running alongside it, hardwood slopes rising on both sides toward ridgelines that disappeared into cloud cover for days at a time in winter. The kind of place that takes years to understand fully and rewards patience with a specific quiet that very old land produces and nothing else does. Reese knew that hollow. She had spent summers and holidays there since she was a child. She knew which porch boards were soft and which windows stuck in damp weather, and where the creek crossed the path behind the house and how high it ran after rain. She knew the way sound moved in the hollow, the way the slopes funneled it, amplified certain frequencies and swallowed others, carried voices further than they should carry, and then cut them off completely depending on conditions she had never fully mapped. She knew the land the way you know a place you grew up visiting, which is to say intimately in some ways and not at all in others. She also knew the rule. It had been passed down through the family from her great-grandmother, stated simply and without elaboration each time it was repeated. Don't answer if something calls your name from the ridge. Don't go up, go inside before dark. That was it. No story attached to it, no explanation offered, no occasion given for why it existed. Reese's mother had told it to her the way she had been told it, which was as a fact rather than a warning, the way you state something that has already demonstrated its own necessity. Reese had grown up hearing it, and had never experienced anything on that property that made her take it seriously, which is the specific condition that makes a rule feel like superstition until the moment it doesn't. She drove up on a Friday afternoon in early October for a long weekend. The visit was practical. The house had been sitting empty since spring and needed to be aired out, checked over, made as certain it had come through the wet season without problems. She told her mother she would be fine. Her mother said she knew. The rule was mentioned once at the end of the phone call in the same tone it had always been mentioned, which was the tone of something said because it must be said, rather than because saying it was expected to change anything. She arrived in the afternoon with enough light left to work. Parked where the gravel widened beside the house, carried in her bags and a box of groceries, spent the next few hours doing what the visit required, opening windows to let the closed-up winter smell out, testing the wood stove, which drew well once she got it going, sweeping the porch, running the water until it cleared, checking the generator, which started on the third pull and which she hoped she wouldn't need. The house smelled like old wood and cold air, and faintly like her grandmother's soap, a smell that had been present in that house for as long as she could remember, and that she associated with safety in the specific way you associate old smells with old safety. She made a simple meal on the propane stove and ate it at the small kitchen table while it was still light outside. Before the signal dropped, she called her mother. A normal conversation. Her mother asked about the drive, asked whether the house had made it through the spring without water damage, mentioned that the cousin had been asking about the property. Near the end of the call, before the signal began to break up, her mother used the name she had called Reese since she was small. A childhood nickname, 2 syllables. Not the name on any document, but the name that lived in the family the way certain names do, used only by people close enough to have earned it. She used it in the context of a question about something personal, a health matter Reese had mentioned the previous week that neither of them had discussed with anyone else. The signal dropped before Reese could answer fully. She set the phone on the kitchen table and watched the last of the daylight leave the hollow through the window above the sink. She was inside before dark. She had remembered that part of the rule without thinking about it. The way you remember things that have been told to you since childhood, even when you don't believe them. She lit the wood stove, turned on the 2 lamps that worked, and settled into the main room with a book she had brought, and the particular satisfaction of a house that has been properly aired and is now warm again. The creak was audible through the kitchen window, the low, constant sound she had fallen asleep to every summer of her childhood. Everything was exactly as it should be. At approximately 9:30, from somewhere above the house, from the slope, from the direction of the ridge, her name was called. Her full, legal name. Both parts of it in sequence, at a volume that carried the distance from the ridge to the house without effort, without the strain that distance should have required. Not shouted. Conversational, almost. The kind of volume you use when you're speaking to someone in the same room. Arriving from a source that was at minimum 200 feet above her, and through stands of dense hardwood that should have absorbed and scattered most of what was produced up there. She put the book down. Her first instinct, in the second before the rule reasserted itself, was that it was a neighbor. Someone from one of the other family properties further up the hollow, cutting across the land the way people do when they know it well enough to treat it as a throughway, calling out to let her know they were there. She opened her mouth to answer. The rule came back to her as a physical sensation rather than a remembered instruction. Not a thought so much as a stopping. She closed her mouth. She sat still. She went to the window and looked up the slope into the dark, the porch light reaching the yard and the lower edge of the slope, and nothing further. The upper slope and the ridge above it swallowed completely by the dark. She saw nothing. She told herself it was a neighbor. She sat back down with the book, and she told herself this in a deliberate way, the way you construct an explanation when you know you are constructing it. She did not read. She sat with the book in her lap, and she listened to the hollow and the creak and the wood stove, and the particular silence that lives in old houses on old land when the night settles in around them. 15 minutes passed, maybe 20. Then the second call came from the ridge, and the second call did not use her legal name. It used the nickname, the two-syllable childhood name her mother had used on the phone that afternoon, the name that existed only inside the family, the name that no one in that hollow would have had any way of knowing. It came from the same direction as the first call, the same impossible conversational distance from the ridge above the house, and it came in her mother's voice. Not a voice that sounded like her mother's voice. The specific timbre of it, the particular way her mother shaped vowels, the rhythm that was as familiar to Reese as anything in her life. She did not move, she did not answer. She sat in the chair with the book in her lap, and she felt the specific cold of a fear that has no clean container, not panic, not the manageable alarm of a practical danger, but something older and quieter than either of those, the fear that arrives when something familiar becomes wrong in a way that the familiar was never supposed to be wrong. She turned on every light in the house that worked. She did not go to the window after the second call. She had gone to the window after the first one, and the window had shown her nothing. And she understood, in the way you understand things that your body has already processed before your mind catches up, that going to the window again was not something she was willing to do. The porch light reached the yard. The yard ended. The slope began beyond it, and the slope rose to the ridge in the dark, and whatever was on the ridge did not need her to look at it to know she was there. She put more wood in the stove. Her hands were steady. She noted this the way you note things about yourself in moments of controlled fear, with a kind of detached attention. The way part of you steps back and observes while the rest of you keeps functioning. Her hands were steady, and she added 2 pieces of wood and adjusted the damper, and the stove accepted them, and the fire built, and the main room got warmer, and none of that changed anything about the ridge or the voice or the nickname that the ridge had used. The wood stove ticked. The creek ran. Every lamp she had turned on held its light without flickering. The house was warm and well lit, and she sat in the chair facing the door rather than the window, because facing the door was a choice she could make. A small directional decision in a situation where most of the decisions had already been made for her. She waited. 20 minutes, 30. The stove settled. The creek continued. The hollow was quiet in the way it was always quiet at night. And if there was a difference between that quiet and the quiet of a hollow, where something on the ridge was standing still and watching the lit windows of a house, she was not able to locate it. The third call came at approximately 10:15. It used the nickname again, but this time the nickname was embedded in a sentence. A question. The specific question her mother had asked her on the phone that afternoon, about the personal health matter, using the same words in the same order, the same slight hesitation before the part of the question that was difficult to ask. The same phrasing her mother used when she was trying to be careful with something that mattered. Word for word. The question her mother had asked on a call that had dropped in the middle of it, on a phone with no signal in that hollow, between 2 people who had not discussed that matter with anyone else. Reese sat in the chair and did not move. She understood what she was hearing. She did not have a framework for it, not then, not now, but she understood the fact of it, which was that whatever was on the ridge had access to something it should not have had access to. A private conversation, a dropped call, a question asked in the careful way you ask someone you love about something that worries you. Whatever was out there had heard it, or had it, or was using it, and she had no way of knowing which of those things was true or whether the distinction mattered. She did not answer. She had not answered the first call or the second, and she did not answer the third, and she understood now that the rule she had grown up hearing, "Don't answer if something calls your name from the ridge," was not the superstition she had always taken it for. It was instructions. It was specific, practical instructions for exactly this situation, passed down through the family from someone who had arrived at them the hard way, the way practical instructions are always arrived at. She did not go to any window after the third call. She did not unlock the door. She sat in the chair facing the door with every light on and the wood stove burning, and she made herself breathe steadily and she waited. The calls did not come again. Not a fourth time, not a variation, not anything. The hollow was quiet. The creek ran, the stove ticked. An hour passed and then another, and the night moved through its middle section with the specific slowness that night has when you are waiting for it to be over. She checked her phone at intervals and found no signal and put it back in her pocket. She was not going to call anyone. There was no one to call and no signal to call them with, and the most useful thing she could do was remain in the chair and keep the lights on and wait for the dark to become something other than what it currently was. At 4 a.m, she began to pack. She did it methodically without hurrying, the way you do something when you have decided to do it, and rushing would only make you feel more afraid than you already are. She repacked her bag. She put her jacket on. She checked that she had her keys and her phone. She let the stove burn down. It was nearly out anyway, and she was not going to leave it loaded, and she turned off the lamps one at a time, starting from the back of the house and working toward the front, so that when she opened the front door, she would be going toward light rather than away from it. She went out the front door with her keys already in her hand, and the car door open before she had fully crossed the porch. She did not look up the slope. She did not look at the ridge. She got in the car, started it, and drove the hollow road in first light, the thin gray pre-dawn light that makes the trees visible as shapes rather than as darkness, without the radio. The road out of the hollow is narrow and winding, and she drove it carefully, and she did not think about the slope or the ridge or the voice or the question until she was 3 miles out and the signal returned to her phone. She pulled over. She called her mother. It was early, but her mother answered on the second ring, which meant her mother had been awake, which meant her mother had spent some portion of the night awake in a way that suggested she had been thinking about the hollow. Reese told her what had happened. Her mother listened without interrupting. When Reese finished, her mother was quiet for a moment that was longer than an ordinary pause. Then she said, "You didn't answer it, did you?" Not as a question. The inflection was wrong for a question. It was the sound of someone confirming something they had been hoping for. The specific quality of relief that only arrives when a feared outcome has been avoided. Reese said no. She said she hadn't answered any of them. Her mother said, "Good." Reese asked her what would have happened if she had answered. Her mother said she didn't know exactly. She said the rule was older than anyone in the family who could explain its origin, that it had been passed down because it had been necessary to pass it down, and that the necessity was its own explanation. She said it the way she said things she had thought about for a long time, and arrived at a position on, not evasively, but with the specific care of someone who is choosing words that are true without being more than what she knows. She did not say what she thought was on the ridge. Reese did not ask. Some questions are asked, and some questions are understood to have been asked already and answered in the particular way that a long silence and a carefully worded non-answer constitutes an answer. Whatever lived in that hollow's understanding of the rule was not something her mother was going to put into plain language on a phone call at 4 a.m, and Reese had enough respect for the weight of it to let that be enough. She has not returned to the hollow alone since that weekend. She has gone back with family, twice in daylight for practical visits, and nothing has happened on either occasion. The hollow is quiet in the daytime, in the way it has always been quiet. The creek and the birds, and the ordinary sounds of old land doing what old land does. She stands on the porch and looks up the slope, and the slope is just a slope. Hardwood and undergrowth and the ridgeline above it. Nothing unusual about any of it. She goes inside before the light changes. The thing she comes back to, the detail that refuses to file itself away, is not the voice, though the voice was her mother's voice, in a way that still makes her stop when she thinks about it. It is not even the nickname, though the nickname was something no one in that hollow had any way of knowing. It is the third call, it is the question. Because the nickname could theoretically be explained by proximity, by someone who had been close enough at some point to have heard it. But the question, the specific words of a question asked on a dropped call, between two people in private, about a matter discussed with no one else, the question has no explanation that she can locate in anything ordinary. Something on that ridge had listened to her phone call, or it had the call in some form she doesn't have language for. Or it knew something about her that a person standing on a ridge in the dark in eastern Kentucky had no way of knowing. Those are the options she has been able to construct, and none of them are better than the others, and she has stopped trying to rank them. Her mother has never elaborated on the rule. Reese has never asked again. The property is still in the family. It will probably stay in the family for another generation at least, passed down the way it has always been passed down, along with the other things that get passed down. The practical knowledge of the land, the memory of the people who lived on it, and the instruction, stated plainly, without embellishment to each person old enough to hear it, about what to do if something on the ridge calls your name after dark. This one comes from a hunter. He asked us to call him Denny. He sat on it for 2 years before submitting it, and the reason he finally did was that a cousin of his had been out on the same ridge the following deer season and had come back with something to say about it. Denny heard his cousin's account at a kitchen table in early December and felt something settle in him that he hadn't expected. Not comfort. More like the specific discomfort of having spent 2 years almost convincing yourself that a thing didn't happen the way you remember it, and then having someone who wasn't there describe the same road and the same sound and confirm that it happened. He hunts. He has hunted since his father took him out at 11 years old, and he has not missed a season since. He knows deer. He knows their patterns and their calls, and the way they move through terrain at different times of year. The difference between a spooked deer and a feeding deer, and a deer that has not yet decided what it thinks of you. He knows what a doe bleat sounds like, and he knows what it does not sound like, and he said both of those things at the beginning of his account, because he wanted the distinction to be clear before anything else was. The parcel he hunted was in McDowell County, West Virginia, accessed off a county route by a decommissioned coal service road that ran back into the ridge for about 1.5 miles before the surface became impassable to anything without serious ground clearance. Denny had hunted that parcel for 8 seasons. He knew the road, knew the terrain, knew where the deer moved at first light and where they bedded in the middle of the day and which draws they used to come down off the ridge in the late afternoon. He had a permitted parcel, and he used it well, and he had taken good deer there over the years, and he had no reason to expect that the season he's describing would be different from any of the others. He parked at the gravel turnaround at the end of the drivable section, a wide spot where the old coal road had been used as a staging area for equipment, the gravel still reasonably solid even after years of disuse, and walked in from there before first light. Standard routine. He was settled into his spot on the east side of the ridge before the light was strong enough to shoot by. The morning was cold and clear, the kind of October morning where sound carries a long way, and the woods have the specific quality of attention they get in early season before the leaves are fully down. The morning was quiet in the way a good hunting morning is quiet, which is full rather than empty. Birds moving, squirrels working the oaks, the occasional sound of something larger passing through the lower section of the draw below him. He saw a doe at approximately 7:15 moving through the lower slope, but she was into the hemlocks before he had a clean look, and he let her go. Nothing else came through. He ate the sandwich he'd brought at mid-morning and drank from his thermos and settled into the patient waiting that 8 seasons on the same parcel had made comfortable for him. The midday quiet came down over the woods the way it does, the birds thinning out, the squirrels going wherever squirrels go when they stop being visible, the whole mountain settling into its early afternoon stillness. Denny had sat through that stillness hundreds of times. He knew what it felt like when it was natural. This was natural. He was comfortable. He was not expecting anything in particular. The doe bleat came from the north side of the coal road at approximately 1:15 in the afternoon. Standard call. Clean, the right length, the right pitch for an estrus doe in early October. Exactly the kind of sound that belonged in those woods on that day. Denny turned toward it and waited. In his experience, the next sound, if there was going to be one, would come within a few minutes and give him better information about direction and distance. It came in less than 30 seconds. From the south side of the road, behind him. Identical. Not similar. Identical, the same duration, the same pitch, the same trailing quality at the end. He turned. He stood very still and worked through what he knew. Sound reflecting off the ridge was possible, but didn't account for the directionality. 2 separate deer communicating was possible, but the timing was wrong. Too fast, too precise. The second call arriving before the first had fully settled. Another hunter on the parcel was not possible. He had the only permit. The call came again from the north before he had finished turning. He turned south and it came from the south. Back and forth, with a timing that had a quality he didn't have a word for at the time and still doesn't have a perfect word for now. Responsive was the one he settled on, because what it felt like was that something on one side of the road was waiting for him to orient toward it before something on the other side produced the sound, and then reversing when he turned, so that the call was always behind him, always requiring him to turn away from where he was looking. He stood in the center of the coal road, and he processed this for about a minute. Deer do not behave that way. He was certain of it. He had 8 seasons on that parcel and a lifetime of hunting behind it, and whatever was producing that sound was not deer and was not echoing and was not another hunter. Something on both sides of that road was using the call in a way that was oriented around his position. And when he understood that clearly enough to say it to himself plainly, he put his call away, the one he hadn't used because he hadn't made a sound, which meant whatever was responding to him, to his presence and his position, rather than to any call he had made. And he started walking back toward the truck. The truck was a quarter mile down the road. He had driven it that same distance hundreds of times and walked it dozens of times checking the property boundaries, and he knew exactly how long a quarter mile on that road felt. He started walking at a pace that was not running and was not casual, the pace of someone who has made a decision and is committed to it. Within 40 feet of when he started walking, the footsteps began. In the leaves off the left side of the road. A light sound, something moving through dry oak leaves with careful weight, not crashing through, not running alongside him, just moving, parallel to his path, keeping pace. He stopped. They stopped. He stood absolutely still and counted to 5 and then took 3 deliberate steps forward. 3 steps came from the leaves on the left, matching his exactly, and then stopped when he stopped. He did not look into the tree line. He made that decision in the moment and he has not reconsidered it since. Looking would have required stopping, and stopping for any reason other than testing the response had stopped feeling like a good idea. He kept his eyes on the road ahead of him, on the gravel surface, on the point where the road curved and the turnaround would come into view, and he walked. The footsteps in the leaves walked with him, not gaining on him, not falling behind, keeping the same distance from him on the left side that they had started at, maintaining it over the full length of the road with a consistency that an animal following its own path through the woods would not produce. An animal moves in its own rhythm, its own relation to the terrain. This had no rhythm except his. The turnaround came into view around the last bend. His truck was where he had left it. He reached the driver's door and unlocked it, and got in and set his rifle on the passenger seat and put the key in the ignition. The engine cranked and did not start. He tried again. The motor turned over, caught almost, and fell back. He had owned that truck for 6 years, and it had started in temperatures well below what that October afternoon was producing, and it had never failed to catch. He sat with his hand on the key, and he noticed that the woods had gone completely silent. Not the natural midday quiet he had been sitting in for hours. Something different. The kind of silence that arrives when every animal in a section of forest makes the same decision at the same moment. The coal road stretched behind him in both mirrors, empty. The tree line on both sides held still. He did not turn around to look out the rear window. He counted to 90. He did it deliberately, one number at a time, giving each one its full second, and when he reached 90, he turned the key again. The engine caught and held. He put the truck in reverse and back to the edge of the turnaround and drove out without stopping. He did not use the radio on the drive out. He reached the county route and turned onto it and drove with both hands on the wheel and the heater running and the radio off. And the county route became the state route, and the state route became something wider with more traffic on it. And he drove until he reached a gas station with a lit sign and other vehicles at the pumps, and he stopped there and sat in the truck for a few minutes before going in to pay for gas he didn't particularly need. He told his wife that evening that the hunt had been slow. That was all he said. She asked if he'd seen anything, and he said a doe in the morning, too far off. And she said better luck next time, and that was the conversation. He did not tell her about the calls or the footsteps or the 90 seconds in the turnaround with the engine failing and the woods silent around the truck. He did not tell her because telling her would have meant she would ask him not to go back. And at that point, he was still not certain he wouldn't go back. Still not certain the thing he had experienced was what it had seemed like in the moment, rather than a series of coincidences that would resolve themselves into something ordinary once he had some distance from them. He spent the rest of that season and all of the following season trying to resolve them into something ordinary. He went back to the parcel the following year, different access point on the east side of the ridge, stayed away from the coal road entirely. The hunting was fine, nothing unusual. He saw deer, took a decent buck in the second week, drove out in full daylight without incident. He went back the year after that the same way, same access point, same avoidance of the coal road, also fine. The parcel was good land and he had a permit for it, and the coal road was one road on a piece of property that had other ways onto it, and he told himself that was a reasonable accommodation to make without it meaning anything in particular. He told himself that for 2 years. Then his cousin came back from the ridge in early December and sat across from him at the kitchen table and said that he'd been out on the old coal service road on the Denny's parcel. He had borrowed the permit for a weekend, a normal thing between them, and that something had happened on it that he wanted to describe. His cousin was not a man given to invention. Denny said that first, the way he had said his own credentials first, because it mattered. His cousin had been hunting since childhood the same way Denny had, knew the same terrain, had the same foundation of practical experience that made him a reliable reporter of what happened in the woods. He was not someone who spooked easily or who elaborated for effect. His cousin described a doe bleat from the north side of the coal road. He described turning toward it and hearing the same call from the south side before he had completed the turn. He described the calls alternating, responsive to his orientation, for long enough that he understood what they were doing and stopped responding to them. He described starting to walk back to his truck. Denny listened to all of this without speaking. Then his cousin said, "The footsteps started in the leaves when he began walking. On the left side of the road, parallel, keeping pace. He stopped. They stopped. He walked. They walked." And then his cousin said something that Denny had not expected and has thought about more than almost anything else connected to that road. He said the footsteps didn't stop when he reached the truck. He said when he got to the turnaround and got into the truck and started the engine, which started on the first try without hesitation, he could still hear the footsteps in the leaves alongside the road, continuing past the turnaround, moving up the road away from him, the sound fading as it moved further away until it was gone. Whatever had been walking alongside his cousin walked past the truck and kept going. Denny sat with that for a long time. His cousin's account was close enough to his own that the details that differed were more disturbing than the ones that matched. The calls were the same. The road was the same. The footsteps were the same. But when Denny had been on that road, the footsteps stopped when he stopped and matched his pace precisely, as if whatever was making them was calibrating its behavior to his. When his cousin was on that road, the footsteps kept moving when he stopped and continued past the truck when he left, as if whatever was making them had its own business to attend to, and his cousin's presence was incidental rather than central. Something had adapted, or the two situations had been different enough in some way neither of them could identify that they had warranted different responses. Denny had been alone on that road. His cousin had also been alone, technically, but there was a variable somewhere that Denny couldn't locate. Some difference between the two visits that had produced different behavior from whatever used that road. He has thought about it across multiple hunting seasons and he has not been able to identify the variable. The sporting goods store where he had bought ammunition for years had a man behind the counter. The same man who had been there since Denny started going in, local, knew most of the regular hunters by name. 2 seasons before any of this happened, in the course of an ordinary conversation about deer activity in that part of the county, the man had mentioned the coal road parcel and had said, without particular emphasis, "Don't follow a deer call on that road if it comes from 2 directions at once. Single direction, you're fine. 2 directions, go back to your truck." At the time, Denny had thought it was a joke about sound reflecting off the ridge walls, the kind of knowing local humor about terrain that gets made in sporting goods stores. He had laughed. The man had not laughed. He had moved on to something else and the conversation had shifted, and Denny had bought his ammunition and left. He went back to the store after his cousin described the footsteps at the kitchen table. He bought a box of shells he didn't need, the way you buy something when you need a reason to be somewhere. He stood at the counter and he told the man behind it that he had been on the coal road parcel a couple of seasons back and that he had heard the calls from 2 directions. The man looked at him for a moment. "You go back to the truck?" he asked. Denny said yes. The man nodded. He rang up the shells and put them in a bag. "Don't follow it," he said. The same words he had used 2 seasons before. Not elaborating, not explaining, the way you say something that is complete in itself and doesn't require addition. Denny took the bag. He said, "Thanks." He left. He has not asked the man what he knows or how he knows it. He goes into the store a few times a year, and the man is usually behind the counter and they talk about hunting and the weather and local news, and neither of them has mentioned the coal road again. Denny doesn't know whether the man has been on that road himself, or whether the knowledge was passed to him the same way such knowledge passes in small communities, which is quietly and without full explanation, person to person, the practical residue of someone else's experience. What Denny knows is the difference between his visit and his cousin's. The footsteps that matched his pace exactly and stopped when he stopped. The footsteps that kept walking when his cousin reached the truck, continuing up the road, fading out 50 yards beyond the turnaround. Whatever was on that road had treated the two of them differently. He does not know why. He has concluded that not knowing why is something he can accept, and that the coal road is a place he can hunt around rather than on, and that some parcels of land have sections you learn to avoid, and some of those sections have reasons for the avoidance that were worked out by someone else before you arrived. His cousin went back the following season. Different access point, east side of the ridge, same approach Denny had been using. The hunt was fine. Nothing unusual. Neither of them has driven the coal road since. The man behind the sporting goods counter retired 2 springs ago, moved out of the county to be closer to family. Denny went in to say goodbye and shook his hand, and thought briefly about asking one more time what the warning was based on and where it had come from. He decided against it. The man had said what he had to say and had said it twice, and Denny had eventually listened, and that was how it was supposed to go. Some warnings are explanations, and some warnings are just warnings, and the useful thing about a warning is not understanding it, but following it. And he had followed it, or had followed it after the first time, which was close enough. This one came to us differently than most. Not through a submission form, not through a family member passing along an account, not through a ranger or a hunter or someone who had been carrying a story for years and finally found a reason to tell it. It came as a rental review, posted on a platform, flagged within hours, removed within 48 hours of going live. The woman who wrote it noticed the removal the same day it happened and emailed us directly. She said she had tried to leave the review because she felt the next person who booked that property deserved to know something. She did not specify exactly what she thought they deserved to know. She said the review had been removed before she could decide how to say it, and that the speed of the removal bothered her almost as much as what had happened, because speed like that implied someone was watching for it. We'll call her Marin. She had rented a cabin on Raven Ridge in Dickinson County, Virginia, for 5 nights in early October. A solo trip. She was a writer, working toward it seriously, not yet making a living at it. And she had been looking for a place with no reliable internet connection, minimal obligation, and enough sustained quiet to think clearly for more than an hour at a time. The listing had described the cabin as a restored hunting cabin with a wood stove, a propane range, a covered front porch, and a back porch overlooking a hollow. The photographs showed exposed beam ceilings, a stone fireplace in the main room, and a view from the back porch that was genuinely good in fall light. The price was reasonable. She booked it without much deliberation. The drive up took longer than the listing suggested. The last stretch switched from paved to gravel about 4 miles from the property, and the gravel road required the kind of reduced speed and adjusted attention that makes 4 miles feel like more. The road wound through dense second growth with the ridge visible occasionally through the canopy above, and the hollow dropping away to the left on the steeper sections. The cabin appeared suddenly, a stand of mature hemlocks screening it completely until the drive curved, and the yard opened up, and the cabin was simply there, small and solid, dark wood siding, a covered front porch running the width of it, and the ridge rising steeply behind. She parked and carried her things inside in 2 trips. The front door key worked without trouble. The main room was close to what the photographs had shown. Stone fireplace, exposed beams, a worn couch positioned toward it, a writing table near the window that caught good light from the south. The kitchen had a propane range and a refrigerator that hummed at a frequency slightly higher than necessary. A bedroom opened off the back of the main room. A narrow hallway ran from the bedroom side toward the back of the cabin, ending at a door that opened onto the covered back porch. The overhead light in that hallway worked intermittently. It came on when she first tested it, flickered twice, steadied, and she filed it under things to be aware of rather than things to address. There was a guest book on the writing table. She read through it while the wood stove was getting established, the cabin warming slowly around her. Most entries were what guest book entries are, cheerful, brief, the specific gratitude of people who had needed quiet and found it. Several mentioned the view from the back porch. One mentioned seeing a bear on the slope below the hollow in the early morning, which she noted as useful information. The most recent entry was different. Just a date, 3 weeks prior, and a single line of text written in careful, unhurried handwriting. Don't use the back porch after dark. No name, no explanation, no indication of whether the instruction was about animals, about the structural integrity of the porch, about anything at all. 7 words and a date and nothing else. She looked at it for a moment. She turned to the next page, which was blank, and turned back to the entry and read it again. Then she closed the guest book and set it back on the table, and went to find the propane line for the range. She assumed it was about the bear, a bear that had come close enough to the porch to make the previous guest uncomfortable after dark. That was a reasonable assumption. It was probably the correct assumption. She had already noted the bear entry from 2 visits prior, and she was aware that bears were active in that part of Virginia in October, working hard before denning. She had no particular anxiety about bears, and she was not going to avoid the back porch because of a guest book entry with no context, but she filed it the way she had filed the intermittent hallway light, as information, neither dismissed nor weighted too heavily. The first full day was good. She wrote in the morning, the writing going better than it had in weeks, the absence of internet and the sustained quiet doing exactly what she had hoped. She hiked a fire road along the top of the ridge in the afternoon, 3 miles out and back, the kind of physical tiredness at the end of it that makes the evening feel earned. She made dinner on the propane range and ate it at the writing table, watching the light on the slope through the south window, and read by the fire until 9 and slept well. The second afternoon, she took her notebook out to the back porch. She had decided the guest book entry was about the bear, and that the bear was a nighttime concern, and that a mid-afternoon sit on the back porch with a notebook was not what the entry was warning about. She sat up in the camp chair she had positioned near the railing, the hollow dropping away below her through the fall canopy, the colors still holding on the lower slopes. Good light, good view. She opened the notebook. The hollow was quiet. She noticed it within the first few minutes, the way you notice an absence that should be a presence. No birds. She had heard birds all morning on the ridge road, nuthatches, a pair of ravens working something on the slope, the distant hammering of a pileated in the hemlocks. On the back porch, with the hollow below her, there was nothing. No insects, which was not unusual for October, but also no wind movement in the lower canopy, no creak sound from the drainage she could see the line of through the trees, no small animal movement in the leaf litter on the visible portion of the slope. The hemlocks around the cabin moved occasionally in a breeze she could feel on her face. Below the lip of the ridge, where the hollow began, nothing moved. She sat for 20 minutes and wrote 3 sentences and went back inside. She did not examine the decision closely. She put it down to distraction and went back to the writing table inside and worked for another 2 hours. She was productive. The afternoon was fine. When she made dinner, she could hear the wind in the hemlocks outside the kitchen window and the ordinary sounds of an October evening at elevation, and she felt no particular unease about any of it. That night, she made sure the back door was locked before she sat down to read in the main room. She did not think about why she had done this until she had already done it. She had walked down the back hallway, the intermittent light on and steady for once, and she had checked the deadbolt and found it unlocked and locked it and walked back to the main room. A practical precaution. She had locked it the way you lock a door at night without it meaning anything specific. She was 2 chapters into the book she had brought when she heard the footsteps cross the back porch. Slow. Each board taking weight in sequence from the far end of the porch, the end furthest from the back door, moving toward the door. She counted 4 boards, maybe 5, the sound tracking from right to left across the porch in a deliberate progression. And then the footsteps stopped. She sat completely still. The refrigerator hummed. The wood stove ticked. The book was open in her lap and she was not reading it, and she was not going to read it. She sat and she listened to the silence that followed the footsteps, and the silence had a quality the earlier silence had not, which was that it was not empty. It was occupied. Whatever had crossed the porch had stopped at the door, and the stopped thing was still there. Then the back door handle turned. Not rattled, not tested with uncertainty. Turned, fully, deliberately, the handle rotating through its complete range of motion as if operated by a hand that understood exactly how door handles worked and was simply determining whether this one was locked. She had locked it. The door did not open. The handle turned and the door held, and she sat in the main room with the book in her lap and forgot to breathe for a moment that was longer than a moment. She was in the back hallway before she had decided to move, both hands on the interior handle. The hallway light was off. She hadn't turned it on when she came down the hall, and she was not going to reach for the switch now. The only light was the thin bar of firelight from the main room behind her, and the slightly less dark quality of the window glass beside the door, the curtain over it translucent enough to show the difference between inside and outside dark without showing anything on the other side of it. She held the handle and looked at the curtained window and understood that the decision she had made without making it, both hands on the interior handle, no light, no sound, was the correct decision, and that she was going to hold it. Against the curtain, just visible in the marginal difference between 2 kinds of dark, something was close to the glass, not pressing against it. Close. Tall, or positioned in a way that read as tall, filling most of the upper portion of the window frame, not moving, not making any sound that reached her through the door. Whatever was on the other side of that glass was as still as she was. She did not turn on the porch light. She did not open the curtain. She held the handle with both hands in the dark hallway, and she looked at the shape against the glass, and the shape looked back at whatever it could see of her, and neither of them moved. She held the handle for 3 hours. She knows the time because she checked her phone at intervals. The screen turned to its lowest brightness setting, angled away from the curtained window so the light wouldn't carry through. 2:17, 2:49, 3:04, 3:31. She checked it the way you check a clock when you need time to be moving faster than it is and it keeps refusing to cooperate. The shape against the curtained window was present until sometime between 2 and 3 in the morning. She cannot be more precise than that because she was not looking at the window every minute. She was looking at the handle, at her hands on the handle, at the door in its frame. And at some point when she looked back at the window, the quality of the glass had changed in the specific way it changes when something that was close to it is no longer close. She did not trust this. She had learned in the previous hour that trust was something to be spent carefully, and she kept her hands on the handle. At 4:15, she heard something she had not expected. From the far end of the porch, the end where the footsteps had started, the end furthest from the back door, a slow creak, the specific sound of a camp chair accepting weight, the slight flex of frame and canvas under a load that settled in and did not shift. And then stillness. The chair taking something's weight and then going quiet, the way a chair goes quiet when whatever is sitting in it has found its position and intends to stay there. She had left the camp chair at the far end of the porch that afternoon when she came back inside. She had not moved it. It had been at the railing, facing outward, facing the hollow. She had walked away from it and left it there. She did not go to the window to look at it. She held the handle, and she listened to the silence that followed the chair's settling, and she waited for whatever was going to happen next to happen. Nothing else happened. The chair did not creak again. The porch did not produce another sound. The hollow below was as silent as it had been all afternoon and evening. That specific absent quality it had. No birds, no creak, nothing moving in the lower canopy. She stood in the hallway with her hands on the handle, and she watched the curtained window and she waited. The sky outside the curtain began to change at around 5:30. Not lighter yet, but different. A quality in the darkness that suggested it was thinking about becoming something else. By 6, she could see color through the curtain's edge. The green of hemlock needles, the pale brown of porch boards. Enough to constitute daylight by the standard she had settled on, which was not astronomical sunrise but the practical threshold of being able to see what she was walking toward. She moved through the main room without stopping, gathered her jacket from the chair where she had left it, picked up her bag from the floor beside the writing table. She had not unpacked much. The bag was mostly as she had packed it. She checked that her keys and phone were in her jacket pocket and she went out the front door. She did not go through the back hallway. She went out the front door, locked it behind her using the key from her pocket, and walked around the outside of the cabin to reach her car, which meant passing the far corner of the building and having a partial line of sight to the back porch. She did not stop walking. She had decided before she moved that she was not going to stop, and she kept that decision. But the back porch was visible from the corner of the cabin, and she looked at it the way you look at things you have decided not to examine, which is briefly and completely, and then away. The camp chair was in front of the back door. Not at the far end of the porch where she had left it. Not at the railing facing the hollow. Directly in front of the back door, positioned at the door and facing it. Facing the cabin, facing inward. The legs of the chair were pressed into the porch boards in a way she could see from where she was standing. 4 small depressions in the wood. The kind of impression that requires weight sustained over time rather than weight briefly applied. The chair had been moved, and something had sat in it for long enough to leave that mark in the boards. She did not stop walking. She got into her car, and she backed out of the gravel parking area, and she drove down the 4 miles of gravel road to the paved county route without stopping. She called the rental host from the first place she had adequate cell service. The call went to voicemail. She left a message describing what had happened in plain terms. Footsteps on the back porch, the door handle turning, the chair moved and pressed into the boards, and asked the host to call her back. She tried the host again 2 days later. Voicemail again. She left a shorter message. She tried once more the following week. The third message went to voicemail and was never returned. She photographed the back porch from the road that morning before she left. A quick photograph taken from the car window without stopping. Her phone aimed at the cabin as she drove slowly past the gap in the hemlocks where the drive turned in. She had not planned to take it. She saw the gap coming and raised her phone and took the photograph and kept driving. When she looked at it later, she could see the back porch clearly in the morning light. The camp chair was visible, positioned in front of the back door, facing in, the legs pressed into the boards in the way she had seen when she walked past. The hollow below the porch was visible through the railing, the bare trees of the lower slope in gray October morning light, the line of the drainage further down. At the far end of the porch, in the shadow under the porch eaves where the roof overhang kept the early light from reaching, there was something. She had not seen it when she walked past. She had been moving and looking at the chair and not at the far end of the porch, and she had not seen it. In the photograph, it was there. Tall. Pale in a way that read as color rather than light. Standing in the shadow at the far end of the porch, at the end where the footsteps had started the night before, at the end where the chair had been before it was moved. She sent the photograph to the rental host. No response. She sent it to the Dickinson County Sheriff's Office with an explanation of what had happened. A deputy called her back and said the image was inconclusive, and that without a specific actionable complaint, they couldn't do more than note the report. She filed a formal complaint. She did not hear back. She posted the review on the rental platform. She wrote it carefully, in plain language, describing the footsteps and the door handle, and the chair and the photograph. The review was flagged within hours and removed within 48 hours of posting. She has no way of knowing who flagged it or what reason was given, because the platform's removal process doesn't provide that information to the reviewer. 3 weeks after her stay, she searched the listing by address. It had been relisted under a different account name. The new listing had different photographs, all interior shots, none of the back porch, one image of the front porch with the ridge visible above it. The description mentioned the wood stove, the propane range, the writing table, the front porch and its views. The back porch was not mentioned. There was no indication in the listing that the property had been recently relisted under a new account. There was nothing to alert a prospective guest that anything had happened there or that a previous guest's review had been removed. She does not know who stayed in that cabin after her. She does not know whether the guest book was left as she found it, with the most recent entry still visible. 7 words in careful handwriting. Don't use the back porch after dark. Or whether that page was removed before the next guest arrived and a new blank page substituted. She thinks about the next guest reading through the guest book, reaching the most recent entries, finding nothing unusual, closing it and setting it back on the table and going to make dinner. She thinks about the back porch at night, accessible from the hallway, the deadbolt the only thing between the main room and whatever crosses those boards after dark. She thinks about the chair and what sat in it for long enough to press the legs into the wood. She thinks about the shape in the photograph and the fact that she walked past that end of the porch in the morning light without seeing it, and wonders at what point it had been there, and whether it had been there while she was walking past, and whether it had watched her get into her car. The property was still listed the last time she checked. The back porch was still not mentioned in the description. And now, we come back to where we started tonight. Harlan County, Kentucky. 43 acres of family land on a mountain that has never been formally surveyed. A cabin that has been in the same family long enough that the original deed is more concept than document. And a woman whose name we are not going to use because she asked us not to, and because the name is part of what makes the account what it is, and using it here would take something from the account that belongs to her. We'll call her the daughter. The grandmother is gone. The cabin is still there. As far as anyone in the family knows, the bag she left inside is still there too. She did not plan to be on that mountain at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night in late autumn. She had planned to be home in Knoxville, doing the ordinary things a Tuesday evening contains. The plan changed when her aunt called in the late afternoon with news about her mother. A health scare. The kind that turns out to be less serious than the first phone call makes it sound, but that is serious enough in the moment that she was in her car before the call was finished. She drove north and west into the mountains, toward the county where the family land sat on a ridge that her grandmother had lived on for the last 30 years of her life. The cabin was the practical reason for the detour. It sat on the property and had been sitting empty since the grandmother's death 11 months prior, and the daughter was the family member who lived closest and the one who had the key, because the family had not yet made a decision about the property, and in the absence of a decision, the key had gone to the person nearest. She had not been up since the summer, a brief visit to check on things, and the night's drive had taken her close enough that stopping felt like something she should do rather than something she had planned. She reached the property after dark. The road up the mountain is the kind of road that requires attention in daylight and full concentration at night. Narrow, no shoulder, the drop on the passenger side visible in the headlights has a darkness that falls away further than you want to think about. She parked in the gravel turnout beside the cabin and left the headlights on long enough to find the porch steps and get the key into the lock. The electricity had been disconnected after the grandmother's death. She had known this and brought a flashlight from the glove compartment, the small one she kept there for practical reasons, and her phone for backup. She unlocked the front door and pushed it open and moved the flashlight beam across the front room. The room was as it had been in the summer. The old couch with the quilt folded over the arm, faded in the pattern her grandmother had chosen in the 1980s and never replaced. The wood stove with its stack of split wood beside it, the wood her uncle had cut the previous spring before anyone had decided what was going to happen with the property. The small table with 2 chairs where her grandmother had eaten every meal alone in her last years. The dust was deep and even on every surface, the kind of dust that accumulates slowly over months, that layers itself in a way that looks almost soft, that records the absence of anyone living there with the same fidelity that fresh snow records footprints. Nothing had been disturbed. Nothing had been moved. The flashlight beam moved across the room and found only the specific stillness of a place that has been empty for a long time and has settled into that emptiness the way old buildings do, their timbers adjusting to the absence of heat and movement and breath. She checked the kitchen, same condition. Dust on the counter, dust on the stovetop, the 2 cups still sitting in the drying rack from the family's visit 11 months ago, the last things touched before they locked the door and came down the mountain. The window above the sink gave her own reflection back. Pale shape in dark glass, flashlight held up, the kitchen behind her in the beam. She stood there for a moment, looking at her own reflection in the black glass, and then she turned and went to the hallway. The hallway runs from the kitchen side of the main room toward the back of the cabin, narrow, low-ceilinged, with a door at the end that opens onto a small back porch that nobody had used much even when the grandmother was alive. The back room opens off the hallway on the left, the room the grandmother had slept in, the room where she had died 11 months ago, in the quiet way that people sometimes die in houses that have held them for a long time. She had not planned to go into the back room. She had planned to do a general check of the cabin and get back in her car and continue north to her aunt's house and deal with whatever needed to be dealt with regarding her mother. The back room was not part of a general check. It was the room they had all agreed, without saying it explicitly, was the room you didn't have a reason to go into. But the hallway ran straight, and the back room door was at the end of it on the left, and she found herself walking toward it the way you walk toward things you are not entirely certain you want to see, which is without having made a decision, your feet carrying you because the alternative is standing still, and standing still in that hallway felt worse than moving. The back room door was not fully closed. She stopped in the hallway when the flashlight found it. The door stood open 4 inches, maybe 5, a gap wide enough to show the darkness of the room beyond it. a darkness slightly deeper than the darkness of the hallway, the room having been shut longer and the air inside it having gone staler. She stood in the hallway and looked at the gap and knew, with the specific certainty of someone who has been part of a process and remembers how it ended, that the door had been fully closed when the family left 11 months ago. She had been there. She had pulled it closed herself, the last one out of the room, and she had heard the latch engage. The door had been closed, and now it was open, and there was no one in the cabin who could have opened it. She stood in the hallway for a moment that was longer than it needed to be for the purposes of checking a door, and continued shorter than the situation perhaps warranted. And then she pushed the door open with the hand that held the flashlight and moved the beam into the room. The bed, its frame and bare mattress. The dresser with the oval mirror above it, her own pale reflection appearing, and then receding as the beam moved past. The braided rug on the floor, the one her grandmother had made from old clothing in the 1970s, its colors still holding. The window on the far wall. She moved the beam to the window. On the interior surface of the glass, on the inside of the window in the room she was standing in, her name was written in the dust. Her full name, both parts of it, first and last, in letters that were careful and deliberate and slightly forward-leaning, the forward lean of someone whose handwriting has been the same for 60 years, and whose hand has settled into it so completely that the angle is not a style choice but a physical fact. She knew the handwriting before she had finished reading the name. She had read it on birthday cards and recipe cards in the margins of a Bible for her entire life. There was no question about whose handwriting it was. There was no version of looking at it and not knowing. She stood in the doorway of the back room with the flashlight on the window, and she looked at her name written in the dust of the 11 months since the family had cleaned this room and wiped this window and locked this cabin and come down the mountain. 11 months of undisturbed dust on the interior surface of a sealed window. Her name, written in her dead grandmother's handwriting, in that dust. She did not touch the glass. The impulse to touch it came, and she set it aside the way you set aside an impulse that you understand, without being able to articulate why, is the wrong thing to do. She took out her phone with her free hand, and she photographed the window. The flash lit the room, and the glass, and the name in the dust, and her own faint reflection behind it, and then the dark came back. She backed out of the room. She was in the hallway, the back room door in her hand, pulling it toward her, when she heard it. From inside the room she had just left. From behind the door she was pulling closed. A sound on the floorboards, not the creak of old wood settling, not the tick of a structure adjusting to temperature, but the specific measured sound of weight moving across a floor, crossing from one side of the room to the other. Slow. The pace of something that is not hurrying because it has no reason to hurry. Crossing the floor of the room where her grandmother had died, in the dark, on the other side of the door she was pulling closed with her hand. She pulled the door shut until she felt the latch engage. She stood in the hallway for one breath. 2. Then she walked through the hallway and through the main room with the flashlight forward and her eyes on the front door, and she went out of the cabin and she locked the door behind her. Her overnight bag was on the floor of the front room. She had set it down when she came in, just inside the door, the way you set something down when you expect to pick it up again shortly. She did not go back for it. She got into her car. She turned it around in the gravel turnout, which required a 3-point turn on a surface that felt smaller than it had when she arrived, and she drove down the mountain road without stopping at any point to look back at the cabin. She reached the bottom of the mountain and she kept driving. She did not stop until the gas station at the junction of the county road and the state route, the one with the lights on and a teenager visible through the window at the register. And she pulled into the lot and sat in the car for a moment and then called her aunt. Her aunt answered. The daughter told her what she had found in the cabin. She described the window and the handwriting and the name and the sound behind the door. Her aunt listened without speaking. When the daughter finished, her aunt was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that is not the absence of something to say, but the presence of something being weighed. Then her aunt said, "We should have told you not to go up there alone." She said, "Your grandmother used to say something was keeping watch on that cabin." She said, "We thought she meant the property. The way she talked about it, the way she said keeping watch, we thought she meant it the way you mean it when you say a place holds something of a person after they're gone. We thought she was being poetic. We should have asked her what she meant." The aunt did not say anything else about what the grandmother had meant. The daughter did not ask. They talked for a while about her mother, who was going to be fine, who was already feeling better, who would be embarrassed by the fuss when she found out how far her daughter had driven. And then they said goodnight, and the daughter sat in the gas station parking lot under the lights for a few more minutes before she drove the rest of the way to her aunt's house. She has not gone back to the cabin. She has not spent a night above 1,200 feet since that Tuesday in late autumn. The property has not been sold, and a decision has not been made about it, and the key is still on her key ring, the same key on the same ring. And she could drive up there tomorrow if she chose to. She has not chosen to. 2 weeks after the visit, her cousin drove up to the cabin in full daylight with a neighbor he trusted, a man who had known the family for years and who asked no questions about why he had been asked to come along. Her cousin called her from inside the cabin. He told her the back room window was clean. The dust that had held the name had been disturbed. Wiped, he said, in a single broad stroke across the glass, the kind of stroke that clears a window rather than smears it. And the name was gone, and the window was clean. Every other surface in the cabin held the same undisturbed dust layer it had held when she was there. Only the back room window had been touched. Her overnight bag was not by the front door where she had left it. It was in the center of the main room floor. Her clothes had been removed from the bag and folded. Not stuffed back in, not piled, but folded. Each item placed on top of the previous one with the kind of attention to evenness that takes time. Her toiletry bag had been set to one side of the folded clothes. The whole arrangement had been placed in the center of the floor with a deliberateness that her cousin described by saying it looked like someone had taken care with it. And she understood what he meant, because care was the word for it. The specific quality of attention that produces a neat stack in the center of a room, rather than a pile against a wall. She asked her cousin to lock the cabin and leave. He locked it and left, and he did not ask her to explain, and she has always been grateful for that. Her cousin's photograph of the arranged bag arrived on her phone 20 minutes after he called. He had taken it before he locked the cabin and left, without her asking him to, because he understood that a photograph was the kind of thing you take when you are inside a situation that will be harder to explain later than it is to document now. The photograph showed the main room floor, the bag centered on the braided rug, the clothes folded on top of it, the toiletry bag to one side. The back room door was visible in the frame, fully closed. Through the doorframe's edge, at the far side of the image, a portion of the back room window was visible. Clean. Nothing written on it. She looked at the photograph for a long time. She looked at the folded clothes and tried to remember whether she had folded them before she put them in the bag when she packed at home in Knoxville, whether some arrangement of hers could account for what her cousin was describing. She had not folded them. She had packed in a hurry, the way you pack when you are going somewhere you had not planned to go, the way you pack when your phone is still in your hand, and your aunt's voice is still in your ear. She had put things in the bag without folding them, and she had set the bag down just inside the front door, and she had not opened it again before she left. Something had opened it. Something had taken the clothes out and folded them and put them back and placed the bag in the center of the room with the toiletry bag arranged to one side, and had done all of this in the 11 months since she left, or in the 2 weeks between her visit and her cousin's, and she did not know which window of time was the correct one, and was not certain the distinction made the fact more or less bearable. She contacted the county sheriff's office after the photograph was shared with her aunt and then with the broader family. A deputy drove up to the cabin within a few days and walked through it and filed a report. He was thorough, and he was not dismissive, and he called her afterward to explain his findings, which she appreciated. He said the cabin showed no signs of forced entry. He said the folded clothes and the arranged bag were unusual, but not inexplicable. His assessment was that someone with a key or knowledge of the property might have entered. A family member who hadn't mentioned it. A neighbor with access. He asked whether she had checked with the other family members. She said she had. No one had been in the cabin. His second assessment, offered more carefully, was that the handwriting on the window was likely the grandmother's own, written at some point before her death and preserved in the dust layer, the conditions in the back room having been stable enough to maintain the impression. He said it was unusual but not impossible. Old houses in mountain climates could be surprisingly stable in their interior conditions when sealed, the temperature and humidity changes dampened by the mass of the structure. It was the most complete, rational explanation available, and he offered it in good faith, and she received it in good faith. She did not argue with it. She simply held alongside it the fact that the family had cleaned the back room in the week after the grandmother's death. They had swept the floor and wiped the surfaces and cleared the window, because that is what you do when you prepare a space after someone has died in it, when you're trying to make the space into something you can return to rather than something you have to avoid. The window had been wiped. Any impression in any dust layer on that window prior to the grandmother's death had been removed in that cleaning. The dust layer that held the name had accumulated in the 11 months after the cleaning, in a locked cabin, on the interior surface of a sealed window. The name was written in dust that did not exist when the grandmother was alive to write it. She has not been back to the cabin. She does not spend nights above 1,200 feet. These two facts have become part of the structure of her life in the way that certain facts become structural, not rules she made for herself and enforces consciously, but adjustments that her life made around an event, the way a house settles into new configurations after a foundation shifts. She does not camp. She does not stay in remote properties. When she drives through the mountains, she drives through them without stopping. The property has not been sold. The family has not been able to make a decision about it that everyone agrees on. And in the absence of agreement, the land continues to sit on the mountain in Harlan County, the way it has been sitting for 4 generations. Held, not used, not released. The taxes are paid. The access road is kept passable. The cabin sits in its clearing with the ridge above it and the hollow below it, and the key to the front door is on a key ring in a kitchen drawer in Knoxville. Her aunt called her 6 months after the visit to say that she had been thinking about what the grandmother used to say, about something keeping watch on the cabin. She said she had been thinking about the phrasing specifically, keeping watch, and about what that implied. Keeping watch implied presence. Keeping watch implied attention directed at something from a position outside of it. She said the grandmother had used those words more than once over the years, always in the same context, always when the cabin came up, and that she and the other family members had consistently understood it as a kind of figurative attachment, the way a person who has lived in a place for a long time might be said to watch over it even after they're gone. She said she wasn't sure anymore that the grandmother had been speaking figuratively. The daughter listened to this and said she wasn't sure either. And then they talked about other things, the way families do, the way the ordinary conversation of people who love each other continues around the things that can't be fully discussed, and eventually they said goodbye and she sat for a while with the phone in her hand before she put it down. The thing she thinks about most is not the handwriting, though the handwriting has not left her. It is not the name, though her name, written in her dead grandmother's script in 11 months of sealed dust, is not the kind of thing that files itself away. What she thinks about most is the sound she heard behind the door, because by the time she heard it, she was already in the hallway. She had left the room. She had backed out of the room and had the door in her hand and was pulling it toward her, and the room was behind her. And that was when whatever was in that room began to move across the floor. Not while she was in it. After she left. Whatever was in that room had been still while she was present and had waited until she was no longer in the room to move. And she does not know whether it waited because it did not want her to see it, or because it did not want her to hear it, or because it was simply finished with whatever looking at her from behind the name on the window required, and was now moving on to the next thing on its own schedule, in its own time, with the patience of something that has been in that room for a long time, and is not in any particular hurry. She does not have a word for that patience. She has tried to find one. The word would need to contain the sense of a thing that is waiting, not because it cannot act, but because it has already determined that it has time, that the particular quality of time available to it is different from the quality of time available to her, that it is not impatient because impatience requires an urgency about outcomes that it does not feel. She thinks that is probably the point. She thinks the grandmother knew it. She thinks the grandmother spent 30 years on that mountain learning what kind of thing it was, and that the phrase she used, keeping watch, was as close as language could get to what she had come to understand. The bag is still in the cabin. Her cousin locked the door, and it has not been opened since. Someone would have to go up and retrieve it. She has not been able to make herself do that, and she has not been able to ask anyone else to do it either. Not without explaining why she doesn't want to do it herself, and the explanation is not something she has found words for yet. Maybe she will. Maybe the right words will come to her eventually, and she will find a way to say, "I left a bag in a locked cabin on a mountain in Harlan County, and I need someone to go get it. And I need them to understand that when they get there, the cabin may not be empty. And I need them to be the kind of person who can hold that understanding without it breaking something in them." She said once that she thought she would go back for the bag eventually. She said this about 2 years ago in a conversation with her aunt, as a way of keeping the option open. The bag is still there. She has not gone back. She said the thing she thinks about when she thinks about going back is the sound of the floor, the measured weight of something crossing the floor in the dark after she left the room. She thinks about whether she would hear it again if she went back, whether it would cross the floor again while she was in the hallway, whether it was the same something, or whether the room only produces that sound when a person has been in it and left. She thinks about these things and she does not go back, and the bag sits in the center of the main room floor in a locked cabin on a mountain in Harlan County, the clothes folded on top of it, the toiletry bag to one side, arranged with a care that belongs to no one in the family who is still living.